Hi everyone, so thanks for the introduction. I'm David Wong, and I have a story to tell you. So, once upon a time, in the beginning of the 90s, two hash functions, one called sniffoo and one called MP4, were released. So, sniffoo quickly got broken by something that was pretty new at the time called differential cryptanalysis. Usually used for block ciphers, but here used on the hash function. And MP4, the older hash function, remained unbroken for years, and so it cannot become the de facto standard to build hash functions. So MP, if you don't know about that, that actually stands for vertical backward. That's the construction used to build MP4. And so a lot of hash functions after that started using the same paradigm to get created. So after that, MP5, SHA1, and even SHA2 got released, and they were using this vertical backward paradigm construction to exist. So MP4 quickly got broken, so we realized that it was even worse than sniffoo, so it wasn't as solid as we thought. And MP5 also, I like MP5 because I can still remember. You must know MP5 was used everywhere in the past, consigning certificates on the web. I used it to store my passwords myself because that's what the internet told me to do. So I'm sure people still do that nowadays. As a consultant, I still see clients using this thing. If you're a consultant or developers, you should know that you shouldn't use that. That's pretty bad. That's pretty broken. But anyway, SHA1 got broken as well this year. I actually show of hands who has heard of SHA1 getting broken. Okay, a fair amount of people. So earlier this year, SHA1 got broken by Google and CWI, collaboration led by Mark Stevens. They ran this algorithm for something like a year on I don't know how many machines, and they ended up with two PFs. So you have an image of the two different PFs next to each other. They have approximately the same content, except that the background has a different color. Okay, so it's two different PF, but when you hash them SHA1, it gives you the same output, the same hash. So that's a collision. Finding a collision for a cryptographically secure hash function is very, very bad. Of course, it's always doable, but it's supposed to be so hard that you're not even after a year running something on I don't know how many computers, you're not supposed to find one collision. So SHA1 broken, and we still have SHA1 being used all over the place, so the degradation is pretty slow. So now we're left with SHA2, and SHA2 is kind of the standard. That's what everybody uses. I'm sure you've seen that in a lot of applications, and if you're on the developer end of the spectrum in security, you must have used that for your own applications. And we're wondering, and especially a few years back, what if SHA2 breaks as well, right? It's built on the same vertical backward construction as SHA1, MP5, etc. And it's kind of the standard. Do we have a backup? Is it that solid? And the story is actually bigger than that. There are way more hash functions. Some of them use different constructions. Some of them use this vertical backward thing. That's a link I got. That's a timeline I got from that link. So if you want the details, you can check that link. But pretty much, you can see that there is a pattern. If you look at the history of hash functions, you can see that there is a pattern between. It goes from the green color towards the red color. Green meaning that we think it was strong, and red meaning that it got broken. Somebody found a collision or something like that. So if we look at this pattern, we can see why people were scared, right? If we look at a different standard than SHA2, we don't really have a backup. So this thing prompted the NIST, an American organization, to create this competition for the next standard, SHA2, as a backup for SHA2 if SHA2 would break. Of course, we've seen that SHA2 is solid over the years. It has proven to be a solid hash function, and it's been pretty good for SHA2. Nevertheless, we had a SHA3 competition, started in 2007, lasted 5 years. It's an open competition, so like AES, You have many teams from all around the world, many cryptographers, researchers, submitting their designs and fighting to become the next standard. It's not like SHA-2. SHA-2 was designed by the NSA. SHA-3 is designed by anybody who wants to be the designer. 64 teams from all around the world competed in 3 different rounds. So that's the list of all the teams with their weird names. And finally, 5 years after, SHA wins and becomes the next standard. So every time I'll be talking about SHA-3, really what's underneath that new hash function is SHA. So other candidates in the 3rd round that didn't make it to the cut were Blake, Russell, JH, and Sky. I don't know how to pronounce them, but they're not losers per se. It's just that there was only one spot for the winner, and we couldn't choose all of them. So they're not insecure, and actually Blake has a second life after this competition. You might have heard of Blake 2, which is an update on Blake, and it's actually being used in a lot of different places. Alright, so the next part of the next few slides we'll see are about SHA-3 and SHA, so I'll explain how it works. Of course, this is not a cryptographic mathematical talk, so I'm not going to bore you with too much details, no equations, no math. I'm just going to give you an idea of how it works. So you're going to go away from this talk, and you're going to get an idea of how the new hash function kind of works. After that, I'll be talking about derived functions. SHA-3 doesn't stand on its own. You'll see that we have different standards that are built from SHA-3. So not just the hash functions, a bunch of different other functions. And finally, depending on how much time I have, I'll be talking about protocols built on top of SHA-3. So SHA-3 is not just a full hash, it's also bringing a lot of different functions, a lot of different tool sets, and it's probably going to change the landscape in applied cryptography during the upcoming years. So you're going to see more and more of that. Alright, so how does SHA or SHA-3 works? Well, at its center there's a permutation, so we call that permutation-based cryptography. Cryptography is a vast field, so you have many different subdivisions of that field. Inside of it, there is the gigantesque symmetric field, and inside of that symmetric field, you have a bunch of stuff that are based on permutations. So permutation, what is it? It's a function. It takes an input of some size and gives you an output of the same size. But I have a better example of that. I have a better explanation. You must know AES, right? And AES is basically a permutation. It takes an input of 120 bits, and it gives you an output of 120 bits. And here we can imagine that it uses a key of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, a fixed key. So we don't care about the key, we just care about the input, the plain text, in case of that cipher, and the output, the ciphertext. Alright? And so if you know how any cipher works, there is a one-to-one mapping between plain text and ciphertext. If you don't have that, you don't know how to decrypt your ciphertext because you have different possibilities, right? So really what that is, the permutation is just something that takes all the possible inputs and gives you all the possible outputs for the same size. So AES is 120 inputs. Alright, so from this permutation, I'm going to construct something that is called a sponge construction that replaces this miracle lanyard construction, remember, that was used for MD5, SHA-1, SHA-2, etc. And this sponge construction was invented as part of the SHA-3 competition. So it's a new way to construct hash functions. And every time I show you this permutation, just think of AES with a fixed key. So here I take an input and I take an input of only zeros. Okay, I fix my input of 0, 0, 0. And I'm not going to tell you what's the size of the input and the outputs. It's just parameters. I don't care about that. It's just a simple explanation. And then you transform the inputs into something kind of random. Now I'm going to divide the input into 2 parts. I'm just going to say that the first R bits of the inputs are called the rates, and the rest of the bits, the C bits, are called the capacity. And I do the same with the outputs. I just divide them kind of wherever I want, and actually I can, in SHA-3 you have different versions of different variants of SHA-3, and they kind of play with where you put the R and the C. Here, I don't really like the rate and capacity name, RNC. It's kind of difficult, it's not very pedagogical. So I'm going to change the names, and I'm going to call the first part of the inputs and outputs the public part, and the rest of the bits, I'm going to call that the secret part, and we're going to see why. And so, if we're using AES as a permutation, you understand I'm splitting my inputs into two different parts and my outputs into two different parts. Okay, so this is a hash function, right? So I need to take a message as input, right? And to take my message, well, I imagine that a message that is the same size or not more than my public part here, that bigger. And I XOR it with this public part, which is only zeros at the beginning. And then I permute the whole thing. So I permute my message and a bunch of zeros. All right? Now, my message might be bigger than my public part. So what I do is that I divide my message into blocks of the size of the public part, and I just, after the permutation, I just XOR it with the public parts of the output. And then I permute again. And if my message is longer than that, I XOR it again with the public part of the output, and I permute again. Okay? I just take each block of the message and I XOR that into my input. And this is called absorbing. Right? We absorb our message. Now, a hash function is not very good if you don't have an output, if you don't have a hash at the end, right? So, what do we do? Well, again here, you can just use the public part, and that's why I call it public. You read the bits, and you becomes your output. And that's it. And if you need a bit more bits, well, you permute, and then you read the rest of the public part, and you append that to what you had previously. And if it's not enough, you do that again, you permute, and you read the public part. Okay, you never touch the secret part. If you touch the secret part, if you leak it, then you have security issues. And actually, in chat they cannot play with this secret part. I forgot to mention that the bigger it is, the more security you get. Alright, and this phase is called squeezing. That makes sense, right? It's a sponge, you absorb the message, and then you squeeze it. Alright, so we have, as part of SHA-3, the release of SHA-3, they have a paper proof that this is secure. We have a mathematical proof that the sponge construction works and it's safe, as long as the permutation at its core is solid, is secure. Now, how do we make sure that this permutation is secure? Well, I don't really have an answer for you. What we do usually is that we just try to attack it. We look at what we know linear cryptanalysis, differential cryptanalysis, a bunch of different attacks in the cryptanalysis wall, and we just try them, and we try to find new attacks, and we just analyze the permutation. So that's why the competition lasted for so long, lasted 5 years, just that people were trying to break it over and over. So, how do we build a permutation? Well, we learn how to do it with block ciphers, with things like AES, and if you know how AES works, you know that there is this kind of sequence of functions that transform your plain text into a ciphertext, and you just repeat these functions over and over. So in AES, you have 10 to 12 rounds, depending on the key size. So you repeat these functions for 12 rounds, or 10 rounds. Here, in SHA-3, you have a permutation, and it's basically a sequence of functions, and you repeat them for 24 rounds. Okay, this is just a detail, don't have to know that, but that's how we build a permutation. SHA-3, so KCHAC, received a lot of cryptanalysis, a lot of good cryptanalysis. This is a page on their website that kind of lists all the papers that were analyzing SHA-3, and this is one of the main reasons why KCHAC was nominated as a winner. It's because it received so much good cryptanalysis. And it's kind of unfair because there might have been other candidates that were equally as good but didn't receive as much attention. So why did SHA-3 or why did KCHAC receive so much attention? Well, one of the clues we can have is if you look at the list of inventors at KCHAC, we see 4 great cryptographers from Belgium and Italy. And one name kind of stands up out of the rest. It's Johan Damon. Actually, anybody here has heard of Johan Damon? Okay, a few people. He's one of the inventors of AES. So when the inventor of AES, the one guy who sold block ciphers, tried to tackle this hash problem, people are interested. Of course, it's not just a popularity contest. The K-Shack design is also very beautiful, very intriguing. So it's not just the guys, it's also a very nice invention. Okay, timeline. Recap, SHA-3 competition, 5 years from 2007 to 2012, very long time. And finally, 3 years after, in 2015, we have the standard. Okay, so it took 3 years in between K-Shack being nominated, being the winner, to finally publish a standard that people can use. So, FIPS 202 is another name, a WPF, and 3 years after, quite some time. If you want to use it nowadays, there is this K-Shack code package. This is the reference implementation in C. And there is also a tweet FIPS 202, so that's Twitter accounts. You tweeted 9 tweets, and if you concatenate all the tweets, it's an implementation of SHA-3. So it's kind of funny, that's why I wanted to show you that, but that's actually done by real cryptographers, including DJB and others. So it's solid, it's safe, it's just not the fastest implementation you can have. Alright, so where is SHA-3 being used? That's actually a question I'm asking you people, and if anyone has an idea, you can shout it, but I'll give you some clues. So anyone has an idea? Crypto-friendly kind of companies using that? Leading edge, modern. Nobody recognize? The what? Cryptocurrencies. Sorry, I didn't. Alright, cryptocurrencies, ledger stuff, blockchain stuff, whatever. They're pretty recent. They know crypto, so they're closer to the crypto world. So they know that SHA-3 is out there, that they can use it. And actually, I was doing some research who is using SHA-3, and I was on these Bitcoin forums and such, and I've seen them arguing or using SHA-3 as a marketing element to their new cryptocurrency, because there are thousands of cryptocurrencies. And they were saying like, oh, my cryptocurrency uses SHA-3, it's modern, blah, blah, blah. A few days ago, their Tor released their new specification, version 3, and they use SHA-3 as well. Alright, so that's it for SHA-3 by itself, because as I said, it doesn't come along, there are some more functions. So if you look at the standard, FIPS 202, of course you don't have to remember that name, but that's the name of the standard. It says SHA-3 standard permutation-based hash, so that's what I explained to you, and extendable output function. So what is this extendable output function? So in the standard of SHA-3 itself, there's another function called shake. And shake is an extendable output function, so it's kind of a hash, but basically you can hash something, same beginning. But at the end, you can get an output of any length you want. So it can be an output of 1 byte, but of course not that, that's not secure. Or it can be an output of 1,000,000 bytes. You can kind of choose what length you want. And that makes it for very interesting applications, and we'll see that the rest is actually built on top of Shake. And it's something you can use in different situations where you're more constrained and you want kind of maybe less security, or you want more security, or maybe you want to use it for something else than the hash. It also has different parameters from SHA-3. So if you look at AES-128 and AES-256, AES-128 has 128 bits of security, and AES-256 has 256 bits of security. I'm not going to go too much into the details, but these are the security we usually try to target. 128 for everybody, and 256 for companies that want to market their product as military-grade encryption. So mostly encryption. So anyway, Shake is targeting these amount of security, 120 bits and 256 bits. So unlike SHA-3, it targets more realistic security, and SHA-3 was criticized heavily because of that. And because of that, it's faster than SHA-3. So today, or tomorrow, if you want to use SHA-3, some modern hash function, I would advise you to use Shake instead. It's more realistic. It's the same thing. You can just get the same output as you get for SHA-3, and it's faster. So yeah, I'll put a picture of milkshake, so you can remember the name of that. I can shake a bit, so you can remember that. But yeah, keep that in your mind. It's going to be important in the next couple of years. All right. Yeah, if you're wondering how to use it, or if you're a pen tester, wherever you are on the spectrum of SHA-3, you want to know what kind of output length is secure, or what kind of security it provides, you can just Google KitShack tune or tuning, and you get this page, and it basically tells you what kind of security you get for what kind of output length. All right, SHA's super cool, super innovative, and you kind of get the idea for many different other functions. And 1 year after the standard SHA-3 is out, another standard from the list called ASP for Spatial Publication 185, again, you don't have to remember the name, comes out, and it has, so yeah, a year after, so that's just a year, right? And it introduces 3 new functions, and these are built on top of SHA. So 3 new functions. Anybody here have heard of that actually? Alright, good, nobody. So either you've never heard of that, or you've heard of that and you didn't understand anything because they have weird names and nobody really knows what to use them for. So my goal here for the next minute is to introduce you to these functions and to give you an idea of where you can use them for, and if you're not a developer, if you're more of a pen tester, where you can advise your clients to use them, or red teaming, or whatever you're doing. So, I mean, those are actual things you can recommend. I've had a client a few months ago that I recommended to use double hash because they were vulnerable to some kind of attack. But I'll be talking about that in the next slides. So, KMAC. To explain KMAC, I need to explain one problem first. Imagine you want to send a message to your friend Bob, okay, across the wire, and you don't want anyone to be able to change that message. You don't care about encrypting the message, you just don't want anyone to be able to modify the message. So what you do is that you hash the message, you put the hash after, and when Bob receives the message, he hashes the message as well, and if he gets the same hash, which is appended to the message, he's fine. Who thinks this is insecure? Show of hands. Alright, not enough people. So that's something that I see all the time, actually. Using a hash function to protect the integrity of a message, it doesn't work. Why? Because if you have an attacker in the middle, I don't know what to name the attacker, basically what the attacker can do is that she can take the message, modify the message, recompute the hash of the message, because the hash is a public function, right? Everybody can do that, and put the new hash next to the message. So when Bob receives the message, he can recompute the hash and see that nothing has changed, so it's fine, nobody has modified it, but that's not true. Right? You cannot protect the integrity of your message with a hash. What you use instead, you need to use some secrets that both you and Bob knows, right? So, what about this thing? What if you put a secret key in there, and so when you compute your hash, you append the secret with your message. And when Bob receives that message, he does the same thing with the key that only you and Bob knows. So, who think that this is better? Who think this is still insecure? Alright, good, some people. So, you cannot use SHA-2 for that. SHA-2 is vulnerable to length extension attacks. You might have heard of that. And that kind of attack basically allows you to, so imagine you're the attacker, you want to modify the message. You cannot really modify it, but what you can do is that you can add more data to that message. And then you can get a hash of the key, the message, and the more data. So this works because when you hash something with SHA-2, SHA-256 here, you hash the thing, you hash the key, then you hash the message, right, sequential, and then you stop, you don't have anything left, and you give the state to the user, the developer, as the hash. You give the entire state. And here, anybody can pretend that the hash function hasn't finished hashing and continue to hash with that state. So that's kind of the idea. And if you understood my explanation on SHA-3 before, you know that you don't give the secret part, so you don't give the entire state, so this is not possible to do with SHA-3. And this is basically KMAC, it's shake, which is SHA-3, really, with a key and message. It's not vulnerable to length extension attacks, and so we can use You can abuse shake or SHA-3 by putting secrets in there. So it's a bit more complex than that. It uses some optimizations and stuff. So it's better to use that rather than create your own. And this is what KMAC is. So you recognize the MAC here, message authentication code. So it's like HMAC, the thing you use when you want to protect the integrity of a message. Not a hash function, a MAC. Alright, so let's look at tuple hash. And every time you can try to guess what's the use of the function from the name, actually. And tuple hash, well, same thing, I'm going to start with the problem. So, I have an RSA public key. First, I have a problem. Who here has used an end-to-end encrypted messaging application? Alright, not enough people, again. Exercise for after the talk. You can install something like Signal, WhatsApp, and other end-to-end encrypted messaging app. So just imagine that you're using this thing and you're trying to talk to Bob, or you're trying to encrypt your messages to Bob because you're talking about something very important. And what you do really is that you use Bob's public key, which is here, for my example, the RSA public key, and you encrypt your messages with that key. And this RSA public key is really Bob's identity. So usually they call that the identity key or something like that. So if you don't know how RSA works, very easy. The public key is just two numbers, E and N. E is very small and N is very big. And the bigger N is the bigger security, the more security you get. E is usually small, sometimes people choose the number 3, so you get the idea. So how can I make sure that I'm really talking to Bob though? Because I got that public key from the server, but Bob didn't give me that public key himself. And actually, so the people who raised their hands previously, who actually verified that these keys were correct, yeah? One person? Two people? Okay, that's not low either. So if you go in these messaging applications, usually you can verify fingerprints, and you have to do out of band in different channels, and you have to verify that with Bob or your friends that you have the same thing on both phones. And usually that thing is a fingerprint of something, and my example, usually it's very close to my example, I take just the hash of my public key. So the hash is shorter than the public key, and I compute this hash of the public key of Bob on my phone. Bob does the same thing, he computes this hash of his public key. Then we meet in real life, we compare. If it's the same thing, then I'm sure that I'm using his public key to encrypt messages to Bob. So, yeah, here I'm just, to create the fingerprint, I'm just concatenating E and N, those two numbers that form a public key. So again, who thinks this is insecure? Alright, nobody, everybody uses. This is, well, I can give you a hint here. So imagine that this is E and this is N. Can you think of another public key, so a different public key than this E and this N, that would give the same hash? So I'll give you the answer, but you can think. A what? Yeah, alright, very good. So Eve can come and create another public key that is the exact sequence of bytes or bits. And basically, the E is the same thing, it starts the same, but then it steals bits from the N. And then we take the rest of the bits, and that's your new N. Right, that makes sense, right? It's the same sequence of bits, but it's a different public key. And if the attacker does that, and I'm talking to the attacker, I'm going to create a fingerprint of that, and I'm not going to see that probably have a different thing. So my client was vulnerable to that, and that's something that you've seen in the public actually quite some time. So if you're looking at some code and you see something like that, if you see that you're hashing something and there is no real structure, there is some ambiguity, then you might have some kind of attack like that. So the common way to fix this issue is to just add the length of the object you're going to hash in front of the object. Or maybe to add what's the object. So you could, for example, hash the letter E, the length of E, and then E, and then the letter N, the length of N, and then N, something like that. And basically, that's what tuple hash is doing. So tuple hash is just shake of the length, the object, the length, the object. Then there's a structure, there's no ambiguity. Yeah, so something you can maybe find a use case for tomorrow, the next month. And that's actually something I've never heard of And I don't think there are any standards that allow you to do that. So usually people hack this kind of thing, but you have a standard. All right, last one, parallel hash. So imagine you're hashing large inputs. You have this strong construction, so you remember that, and you want to parallelize that thing because it's kind of computationally heavy, and you want to be able to use parallelization to kind of do this thing faster. Now, if I want to parallelize this permutation, I need the output of this permutation before. And if I want the output of this permutation, I need the output of this permutation first, right? It's very sequential. I always need the output of the function that comes before to actually compute my function. So we cannot really parallelize SHA or SHA. So basically what SHA does, and that's what we call tree hashing, is that it divides your message into large blocks. It hashes these blocks individually to create a smaller outputs, and it hashes one last time all the outputs of these different hashes. So it's not too complicated, it's just what we call tree hashing, and it's very, very fast for large inputs. So that's actually, if you remember SHA-1 having problems, Git uses SHA-1, and so that's one of the functions that they propose to replace SHA-1 inside of Git. Alright, so yeah, 3 new functions that were created last year. 2016, double hash, parallel hash, and KMac, and they all have different use cases. I just want to mention a few things before I start talking about the derived functions. There's an open competition called Caesar for the next authenticated cipher. So think of something like AES-GCN. And it's an open competition. It's very slow, so we don't know when it will finish, but there are a few candidates that use these IDs on the sponge, and there are actually 2 candidates that use KCHAC. So it's called KYAC and KT. And that might mean that in the future, you might not be using AES-GCN, but you might be using, again, SHA-3 or something derived from SHA-3. Which is very good in a sense, because if we have hardware support one day for SHA-3, which actually, I think some hardware vendor released that a few days ago. I can't remember who. But if you have hardware support for KCHAC, then you have hardware support for encryption, hashing, and a bunch of other things. Just mentioning that's very important. One last thing. For some people, hashing is very important in the sense that they need a very efficient hash function. They need something that is very fast. This is usually not most use cases, but some people want some very, very hash functions. So you can think of big players, Google, Facebook, Cloudflare, etc., and they don't really want to use SHA-3 because for them it might be too slow. So the KCHAC team released a new hash function in 2016, so very new, very mature. It's kind of the state-of-the-art hash function. It's called Kangaroo 12 and MySQL 14. It's very, very, very fast. It's faster than parallel hash, SHA-1, SHA-2, SHA-3, etc. Very, very fast. Realistic parameters like shake. It uses less rounds in that function to target more realistic security. And the cool thing is that it has tree hashing by default. So SHA-3 doesn't have this tree hashing, but it allows you to hash large inputs very, very fast. Kangaroo 12 can hash large inputs very, very quickly. So for large files, it's very good. But remember, for short inputs, that's something that I didn't show you, but since I'm hashing twice in parallel hash, I get a penalty for small inputs. And Kangaroo 12 doesn't have this penalty. So Kangaroo 12 is fast for large inputs and small inputs. So today, tomorrow, if you want to use a hash function and something that is modern and very quick, very fast, I advise you to use Kangaroo 12. It's also an extendable output function, so you can play with the output length. If you need to use a standard because I don't know, you're an American organization or you're dealing with the American government or something like that, then you can use SHA-3 or SHAC since it's a standard. Alright, so this is my last slide on all these derived functions and SHA-free functions. And it's kind of a recap of all these things that were created in the process of creating SHA. So again, we have the code here. If you want to take a look at it, and I'm going to deep inside derived protocols. So can someone tell me how much time I have? 10 minutes? Fine. So I'll be brief here. This is kind of this is more experimental. This is not something that we use nowadays, but it might be something that is going to become more mainstream in the next upcoming years. So remember, this functional construction absorbs messages and then squeeze them, right? And you can squeeze as much as you want in these soft functions. Now you might wonder, why can't I continue to absorb after and squeeze again and then absorb again and squeeze again? It might be possible to do that, right? And that's actually something that the KitCheck team asked themselves, and they created this new construction called the duplex construction. And this basically allows you to absorb and squeeze and absorb and squeeze, etc. And it allows you to do a bit more complex things. So one thing that was invented out of that is a stroke framework protocol. It's a symmetric protocol, so think of something like TLS, HTTPS, where you get rid of the handshake and you just pair up on encrypting your data, or something like that. And before I explain to you how it works, I'm just going to give you an example of how you would use something like this. So imagine I'm a developer and I want to use it, and I have two devices, I have a client and a server, or something like that, I don't know, an IoT device and a server. What I will do on both sides of the connection is that I will instantiate an object, a strobe object with some string. And that can be a customization string, my protocol, my website.com, doesn't really matter. And then you key your protocol. So imagine you did a handshake via TLS, or maybe you have a password that you share with the server and the client, or a key or something like that. You use it to key your protocol on both sides of the connection, that shared secret. And then you can pretty much do whatever you want. So here, one example is that I encrypt the GET requests. I authenticate the GET requests, right? You never encrypt and send your ciphertext like that, that's very bad. You always encrypt and authenticate. And on the other side, you will get the reverse operation, which is receive encryption and receive MAC, and you will verify your MAC. This is just to give you an idea of how you use it, okay? I don't want to get too much into the details here. You have many different functions that allows you to do many different things, from generating random numbers, to authenticating, to encrypting, to deriving new keys, hashing, etc. And I think I'm going to skip that because I don't have too much time now. But basically, this is how it works. You use this duplex construction and you absorb the operations and you play with it continuously. So you always use the same states. And that means that when you encrypt something, it doesn't only depend on the key you're using, but all the data that you've exchanged prior to that. When you authenticate something, it authenticates everything that you've sent and received before that. So it's kind of a new way to build protocols where you want to make sure that everything is consistent. There was no message dropped, nobody reordered messages, nobody added messages, and so on. So you can use it to create hash functions, you can use it to derive keys, you can use it for many different things. The sexy part of Strobe is that really you can do all your symmetric crypto in one place just based on SHA, just based on this KitCheck permutation. So you only have, for someone like me who actually consults for cryptographic products and who has to look at code and libraries and stuff like that, this is very sexy because I only have a small portion of code to look at, and it's all the security there is. Of course, people have to use it securely, but at least the core cryptographic elements are very short. There's a specification. It's a stable version number, so it's 1.0.3 now, not 0.2. But it's still experimenting in the sense that not a lot of people have experimented with that yet. This is from Mike Hamper from Cryptography Research, Ramos. So they might be using that internally there, I'm not sure. And I'm gonna skip that. And okay, if you want to know more about crypto, to read more about what I do, I have a blog where I write about crypto a lot. Very technical and less technical, and I write about security as well. And you can follow me on Twitter if you want to see a lot of stupid things. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.